When you look at a meadow, it's easy to just see this beautiful, kind of chaotic jumble of life, right? But what if I told you it's not chaos at all? It's actually a highly disciplined, high stakes marketplace. Seriously. So let's dive into this hidden economy. We've got flowers as the sellers, bees as the buyers, and believe me, everybody is trying to get the absolute best deal. And get this, the central mystery of this whole marketplace was spotted more than 2,000 years ago. Aristotle, of all people, noticed that bees are incredibly loyal shoppers. They don't just browse around randomly. Nope. They pick a brand, let's say a violet, and they stick with only violets for their entire trip. So the huge question is, why? What's behind this strict brand loyalty? And you know what? Aristotle totally nailed it. Modern science, specifically pollen analysis, proves he was right. When scientists check out the pollen a forager bee brings back home, it's almost pure. We're talking 95 to 99% from a single plant species. That is just incredible. This isn't some random accident. It's a very deliberate economic strategy. So yeah, let's unpack the economics behind this amazing focus.
Okay, to really get what's going on here, we have to define the rules of the market. See, there are actually two different kinds of loyalty that biologists keep track of. And honestly, they work pretty much just like they do in our own economy.
First up, you've got something called constancy. You can just think of this as brand loyalty. It means a bee will literally ignore a perfectly good tulip that's right next to a rose because on that trip, it's only shopping for roses, period. Then we have fidelity. This is more like store loyalty. This is the bee's habit of going back to the exact same patch of roses, day after day, even if there are other rose patches that are closer. So, here's the really crucial part. This isn't a one-sided thing at all. This whole loyalty system works because it's a win-win. It benefits both the buyer, the bee, and the seller, the flower, in very specific ways. It's a perfect two-sided deal. All right, let's look at it from the seller's point of view first. The plant. I mean, it can't move, right? So it desperately needs a reliable courier to deliver its product, which is pollen, to another flower of the exact same species. Think about it. If a bee drops apple pollen on a cherry blossom, that's a failed delivery. The pollen is completely wasted. So bee loyalty ensures the right product gets to the right address. That's how you get successful fertilization. Okay, so what's in it for the buyer, the bee? Well, it's all about pure profit. Every single flower has a unique shape, a different structure. By specializing in just one type, a bee gets on a really steep learning curve. It totally masters the specific moves it needs to get that nectar out as fast as possible, maximizing its energy profit per minute. If it switches brands, it has to pay a retooling cost. It has to learn all over again, and that just wastes precious time and energy. So, this is a seriously sophisticated strategy, right? And to actually pull it off, bees have this fascinating set of mental tools they use to navigate what is a very complex and, frankly, noisy marketplace. You have to remember, bees have tiny little brains with limited processing power. So to cope with all the visual noise, they form something called a search image. It's basically a temporary filter in their brain. So if a bee is hunting for, say, blue flowers, its brain actively highlights everything blue and pretty much makes all the other colors just fade into the background. It's a genius energy-saving shortcut to find its target brand fast. But wait, the flowers aren't just sitting there passively. Oh no, some of them are basically engaged in chemical marketing. I'm not kidding. Plants like coffee and citrus actually lace their nectar with tiny doses of caffeine. Now, it's not to give the bee a buzz, it's for a neurochemical advantage. It literally enhances the bee's memory, making them 3 times more likely to remember that flower's scent 24 hours later. Talk about securing repeat business. And just like us, bees are powerfully influenced by the fear of getting a bad deal. They show a classic principle from behavioral economics, loss aversion. Here's how it works. If a flower patch's sugar reward goes up a little bit, a bee's loyalty, it barely changes. But what happens if that reward goes down? Oh, their loyalty absolutely plummets. A disappointed customer will ditch a brand way faster than a satisfied one becomes even more loyal. How distinctive the product is also really matters. When flowers are visually high contrast, like these blue and yellow ones, bees form super strong, hard to break habits. But when the flowers all kind of look the same, like the blue and white ones here, their fidelity is much, much weaker. It's just easier to switch brands when the competition looks almost identical, isn't it? But here's the thing. Not all pollinators use the same shopping strategy, not even close. A fantastic example of this is looking at the difference between the famous honeybee and its cousin, the bumblebee. So here's the tale of the tape. The honeybee is what you'd call a risk-averse hoarder. It finds a good deal and just exploits it relentlessly. We're talking a 76% revisit rate. It even does that famous waggle dance to tell all its sisters to go to the exact same spot. The bumblebee, on the other hand, it's a flexible explorer. Its revisit rate is way lower because it's constantly sampling other options, always on the lookout for a new, maybe even better, deal. And this USDA study on alfalfa shows this perfectly. Honeybees. They showed high fidelity to a flower patch no matter how big it was. A little convenience store is just as good as a giant supermarket to them. But bumblebees? Totally different story. They showed really low fidelity to the small patches. They'd much rather focus their energy on the big supermarket where they have way more options.
And then you've got pollinators who use a completely different model altogether. We're talking vertebrates like hummingbirds and bats. They are trap liners. So instead of just hanging out in one patch, they follow a learned, repeatable route over huge distances, connecting a whole series of high-reward flowers. They're less like shoppers in a single store and way more like delivery drivers on a fixed, very profitable route.
So why does any of this matter? Well, it matters a lot because these tiny individual economic decisions made by a single bee, they scale up and they have massive consequences for entire ecosystems and yeah, even for our own food supply. Okay, so here's the ecological bottom line. High fidelity, the kind we see in honeybees, it leads to very localized gene flow. Basically, genes only move between plants that are super close to each other. Now, this is fantastic if you're trying to pollinate a dense field of crops. But lower fidelity, the kind you see in explorers like bumblebees, that creates long-distance connections. It mixes the gene pool across the entire landscape, and that is absolutely crucial for the health of wild plant populations. And this is where it creates real risks for us. On one hand, you've got the hybrid failure. See, to create hybrid seeds, you need to cross-pollinate two different rows of plants. But a super loyal honeybee might just refuse to switch brands, and boom, the crop fails. Then on the other hand, there's the greenwashing risk. Introducing tons of honeybees to an area to, quote, save the bees can seriously backfire. Their intense, loyal foraging can actually outcompete the native pollinators and mess with the genetic structure of wild plants by stopping that long-distance gene flow we just talked about. So it really turns out that this whole idea of floral loyalty isn't just some cute accident of nature. Not at all. It's a calculated economic negotiation, constantly balancing the plant's need for an accurate delivery against the bee's need for pure caloric profit. And all of this leaves us with one last big question to think about. If nature really is an economy with its own rules of risk and reward, to what extent are we, with our agricultural practices, manipulating that market? And what are the unforeseen consequences?